Welcome to Represent NYC on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Victoria Burt. I'm the producer of this show. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about rent. And so joining me now is Leah Goodridge, the supervising attorney with the Mobilization for Justice here in New York. There's been a real big demand for cancel rent, freeze rent, and the demand for some attention to be paid to the fact that millions of people filed for unemployment. I think it was over 3.5 million people filed for unemployment. And that means they don't have a job. And that means when rents came due today, that was very stressful. So tell me what you're seeing on the ground.
Social distancing really requires people to stay at home. And so people now more than ever need a place to stay. So the second is that people are anxious of being able to keep that home because they're not sure that they're going to be able to pay the rent. People right now that have been fortunate enough to keep jobs now have to make the decision of going forward, will they be able to maintain their jobs? And so, because of the pandemic, a lot of people have to hoard their money to be able to buy toilet paper, sanitizer, soaps, when they become available, because right now in a lot of stores, they're not available. So it really is a sort of like decision between sort of air and water, two necessities. So your home and your rent, or other necessities.
If you've lost your job, and like many people, you're living paycheck to paycheck, and this means you have X amount of dollars to cover the rent, or like you say, X amount of dollars to buy groceries for the next foreseeable future. If you don't pay, what happens?
If you don't pay your rent for the next couple of months, then a landlord, when the courts reopen, can proceed with the process of eviction. They can also send what's called a predicate notice, which is a rent demand. That is, before a case starts in court, there are rules that the party starting the case has to try to give the other side the opportunity to avoid going to court. And so in non-payment, that terminology is called a rent demand. And so instead of a tenant having to go through the entire process of going to court, the landlord will give that tenant the opportunity to say, here's how much you owe, here's what I'm demanding of you, and if you don't pay it by this stated time, then I'm going to take you to court. Those can still be served as of now.
There's no stay of paying your rent, right? That is what it has to happen, essentially.
The only stay, and by stay I mean freeze, the only stay right now that exists for tenants is there is a stay on evictions. So that just means that right now, if a landlord wanted to, a landlord could not proceed with the eviction process of a tenant. So if a tenant already had a housing court case, housing courts are closed only for emergency cases right now. So most cases are not proceeding. And if a landlord wanted to bring a new eviction case, the landlord will have to wait until A, housing court is open, and B, even if it were open, there's still a stay on evictions.
There are a lot of hashtags out there, right? Rent freeze, cancel rent.
Right.
There is a difference between those things too, right?
The terminology rent freeze, especially in New York, specifically means that when it's time for your lease to be renewed, that the landlord is not going to be able to increase your rent. So your rent is frozen at what it was during the prior lease period. So that's a rent freeze. So it doesn't mean that you don't have to pay rent. It means that when it's time for your lease to be renewed, the landlord cannot increase the rent at all.
Right. Okay.
A cancel rent is rent forgiveness, right?
Okay.
And I just there are other terms out there that I want to define. A moratorium
Okay.
generally just means that there's a hold on things. But again, a moratorium, like a suspension, means that once that hold is up, it's business as usual. So if the moratorium is lifted tomorrow, well, it's business as usual. Same with the suspension. I know that there have been terms about mortgage suspension and suspension of other things. And generally, suspension just means that the person does not need to pay those months or those weeks at that time, but they still need to pay those months later on when the suspension is lifted.
the amount of money due would just keep accumulating.
Keep accruing. So for
Accruing,
example,
okay.
if someone's rent is suspended
Mhm.
and they owe $1,000 a month, and 3 months down the line, the rent is suspended for 3 months, well, at the end of the 3 months, they will owe $3,000 and plus the $1,000 of that new month.